Welcome to a special episode of Beyond Four Walls, where we delve into the world of property management and well-being. Today, Shelley Jacobs and I are focusing on time management. In a role where emails never stop, emergencies don't wait, and everyone's issue feels urgent, managing your time can feel impossible. We'll be exploring practical strategies that actually work in the real world of block management, how to prioritise when everything feels important, how to protect focus time, and how to stop your diary running you. Because time management in our sector isn't about doing more, it's about doing what matters and doing it well. Shelley, time management, how do we define it? Is it one of those things that people just automatically think that they should be good at? What's your philosophy?
Well, firstly, I don't actually like the phrase time management. I know that's the theme of the whole episode, so I'm just going to say, because actually we can't manage time. And I think it's an unhelpful phrase. We can't manage the ticking of a clock. But what we can do is we can manage the ticking of the old noodle. And I think that there's a lot of psychology behind how we make decisions on how to spend our time. So I think a more helpful way to think about time management is using time effectively. Because, like I said, we can't actually manage the ticking of the clock.
No. So more of an energy management strategy then? Because I know certainly from my own experience, and I struggle with an underactive thyroid as an example of some things that I struggle with. But one of them is an underactive thyroid, which I do have fluctuations in my energy, and then there's fluctuations in how much work I've got to do on a day-to-day basis and that sort of thing. So is it a case of you manage your energy more around what you need to get done? If you know you've got to go all guns blazing into one area and you know you've got to kind of get that sorted, but the next day you know that you can have some downtime, is it more that sort of thing? Or?
I think energy plays a massive part in how we navigate through the day. What I often say to people is actually conduct an energy audit. It sounds a bit kind of boring to say audit, but think about when do you have the most amount of energy? Are you more of a morning person and you come alive in the afternoon? I am a terrible morning person. Terrible. So I know that arranging meetings at 9 o'clock in the morning where I have to use my brain, it's not good for me. And I tend to come a bit more alive later in the day, but again, it depends on things. So I do think that factoring in our energy levels can be helpful when we're thinking about managing our time effectively, and being quite strategic about how we plan our time around that. Because there's no point, like I said, no point if you're not a morning person, there's no point having a meeting or planning to do something that requires a particular part of your brain if that's not where your energy's at. So I do think that's quite an important component when thinking about using your time effectively.
Okay, so then it's more of understanding your working style potentially. So if you know that your working style is more orientated to, I'm better working on my own first thing on the morning, but I know that in group work, shall we say, I'm better in the afternoon, but then how do we then mix that as an organisation? It's difficult, isn't it?
It is difficult, and I think everyone's approach to organisation and how they use their time is unique. We are all unique. I think it's about understanding what works best for us, and as you said, sometimes how our day gets mapped out is in our control, and sometimes it isn't. If we've got external meetings with clients who can only do a certain thing, we have to go with that. But I think it's where we have got some control, the considerations around what works for us best, is something that should be factored in.
And is there an element there when it comes to neurodiversity and how that intersects with time management challenges potentially?
So I think it's different for different neurodivergent challenges. Obviously, one of the big conditions that impacts executive function is ADHD. So I have ADHD. I struggle with my time management despite training people on it. But I struggle with that. I struggle with sort of planning, time blindness. It's real. So I have to be a bit more aware of where I might need a bit more support, or, sometimes I have to be quite clear on there's no point scheduling me into a meeting then because I'm not going to be able to respond in the way I might need to, etc. But that's me personally. I think, like I said, a lot of people with different neurodivergent challenges have different executive functioning challenges around using time, planning, organisation. And it's just understanding what you need to help you to work at your personal natural best, whatever that might look like.
And we'll get into productivity tips and that sort of thing in a moment, but do you think that the like a productivity culture, so having to take everything off with, I've got a list of things that I need to do today and I'm going to tick that off, and therefore, that is my time management sorted, I've cracked it. But actually, is it making it worse? Because, and what I mean by that is, imagine you had a bundle of information that you had to send out to a leaseholder, or anybody, any client, no matter what industry you're working in. You have a bundle of information and you just send that bundle of information because you're just ticking that box. I've done it, I've sent it. That only took me half an hour when I scheduled an hour and a half to do that. But actually what that creates is 10 emails back, 20 phone calls, when actually if you spent half an hour more on writing a covering letter or explaining that bundle in a different way with an infographic or something like that, does that then, is that more of a better way of managing your time than just, well, I have to be productive, so I'm just going to tick, 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 but I don't actually think about the consequences of those actions?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people get into that mindset, particularly in our industry, particularly where email volume is very high and there's that need to just plough through hundreds of emails and respond. You kind of get into that bull in a china shop mindset of just ploughing through stuff quickly. And yeah, I do think that being a bit more strategic about how you respond to things will impact your time. Because what we don't want is to send an email and then, as you said, get 20 million emails back on the same topic. So I do think there is a need to press pause. Firstly, really make sure that you're understanding the question that's being asked. It sounds like an obvious thing, and it kind of reminds me when I was at school, read the question of an exam, make sure you're answering the right question, and it's amazing how many people are not really answering what somebody is asking. So I do think there is an element of slowing down and just spending a few more minutes making sure that you've answered the question, because if you haven't, it's going to be more costly in terms of your time ultimately. So yeah, I think there's definitely a better balance there, and I've seen that over 20 years of property managers who just and nowadays, like I said, the email traffic is huge. I also think the better way is for people to pick up the phone and not rely on email so much, because on the phone you've got a conversation, you can nip issues in the bud. And I actually think from a time management perspective, it's better. But then people have anxiety about using the phone, and that's a whole different conversation. Yeah, but purely in terms of managing time, yes, slow down and be more purposeful and strategic about how you're using your time to mitigate the 20 million other responses. Preempt what somebody is going to ask you as well, and give them, you don't want to give them too much information, and definitely less is more in terms of words. Bullet points, people use bullet points. But yes, I think we do get into that mindset of just fashioning things out, and it's ultimately not very helpful.
And you don't want to think that preempting thing either, do you? You don't want to think, well,
getting the right balance.
I'm falling into that perfectionism concern, I guess, because ultimately you have that, well, what if they ask this and I haven't answered that in my first correspondence? I haven't put any thought into that. I'm going to get therefore I'm not going to do, therefore you procrastinate. And again, that's probably just a whole other conversation that we need to have. But is there a perfectionism element to this as well?
Maybe, I think so. For me, I have that perfectionist mindset that I battle, particularly if I'm composing an email to somebody that's external. I will sit sometimes and redraft the same email just to kind of tidy up the language, and I don't want to sound stupid, and you don't want to give too much information. I'm a bit of a waffler, shocker. I waffle. I'm an info dump person. Sometimes in emails I realise I've just waffled on, and I need to like cut some of that waffle out. I spend too much time doing that, and I'm aware of it. And I recently tried to kind of almost train my mind to just, if it's not perfect, it's okay. Because for me, one of the things about managing time is that every minute counts and time accumulates. And if you spend, let's say, 10 minutes on an email that you could have spent 5 minutes or 3 minutes, those minutes add up. I have this statistic around, if you waste 30 minutes every day, that equates to a year to 17.6 working days in the year.
I'm grateful to you.
In my brain. That's over 3 weeks of time wasting. And when you think about 30 minutes, 30 minutes, you get to 30 minutes so easily. An email that's taking you a couple of minutes longer, a meeting that's overrun by a few minutes, a couple of cups of tea, checking your WhatsApp messages or whatever. You can get to 30 minutes very, very quickly. So the minutes add up. So any of those things, be it perfectionism, redrafting, or whatever it might be, the minutes add up to a lot of time. And I think a better way to think about that is, how can we flip that language around to say, how can we save 30 minutes every day? And if we're saving 30 minutes every day, we're saving over 3 weeks of work in a year. And that's part of the story of managing our time effectively. So yeah, perfectionism is a time-wasting activity, and sometimes something being okay needs to be enough.
Yeah, and finding that balance then, isn't it, between what I just said about giving the information at the start to avoid all of the stuff coming back, but being so much of a perfectionist over that you don't actually end up getting it out, and you dither over it, and you just panic over it, and then you just don't do it. So therefore, you're wasting all of that time. It's getting that.
It's a balance.
That balance, right?
Yeah, that's it. You don't want to give too much information, but equally, it depends on the person, depends on the story. But there are certain things you can preempt. And actually, what we've started to do in terms of our business is, when we're sending out, I don't know, let's say Section 20 to major works or something that we know is going to elicit a lot of questions, we will literally put an FAQ sheet in with the commonly asked questions, just to try and eliminate some of that sort of, people will still call it.
Of course they will.
But anything we can eliminate to manage our time better. And there is a balance, but it's trying to get that balance right.
So talk to me about lists. I love a list.
I love a to-do list.
Love a to-do list. Don't always get through my to-do list, but do love a to-do list. Do you have a list system? Do you have a different system? Do you have
I do.
multiple systems?
Yeah, so for me, I use a bullet journaling technique, which is basically, it's a form of note-taking with symbols. So if I have to do something, I have to write everything down, because that's how my brain works best. If I need to do something, I put little dots, and then when that thing's done, I put a little X on it. If I've got a meeting or notes, I put a little dash. So it's something, Google it, people. But basically, that's the one thing that has consistently worked for me, which is bullet journaling. I have recently tried to move into a more technology-based kind of form of to-do list. So I've got, I can't remember now what it's called. But there's lots of those sorts of apps that can help you when you put everything in. I tried it. I love a bit of technology. I'm a bit of a super geek. But there's something about the physical act of writing that helps me to think things through. Bullet journaling, that's what I use.
There's a psychological element to that as well, as literally putting pen to paper to get out of your head. It doesn't have the same effect if you're doing it on your phone for some reason. I don't know the psychology around that, but that's what it is.
Writing effectively is an image, if you think about it in that way. And the brain remembers things graphically more than in language form. So there was a study done, I can't remember all the details of the study, but lots of studies done, that looked at students that take notes in lectures And those students that made notes in a lecture were more likely to remember the information than those who didn't take any notes. And that's even if they never looked at those notes over again. So literally within the brain, our part of our brain that stores memory is closely linked to where our images are processed. So that kind of makes sense.
All right, I'm with you on that. That sounds good. And we touched on procrastination just a moment ago around perfectionism, but do you have any tips on tackling procrastination, if I can say it properly?
So procrastination, is putting something off. We all do that. But what we need to figure out is why are we putting that thing off? And there are lots of reasons for that. It might be that we just don't like doing that thing, and so feel a bit begrudging about having to do it. It might be that thing, whatever it is just too overwhelming, too big, too complicated, and we need to break it down into smaller, manageable, bite-sized chunks. But very often procrastination, I think, comes down to confidence. If we don't feel confident to do something, it's very easy for it to go to the bottom of the pile. But the problem with putting things off is that it impacts how we use our time, because eventually that thing is going to become urgent, and it's going to be right in the middle of when we're doing something else. So if we're putting something off, we need to press pause and go, right, why am I putting that off? And if we can answer the why of it, then we can come up with a solution. And I've done that, I'm guilty of it myself. And there was one example where I had a client report to do that was quite financial. And for many years of my career, I was head of accounts, but I'm not an accountant. So I have it in my head, that language of, I'm not an accountant. And I had to do this piece of work, and I kept thinking, I don't actually know if I've got the skills to do this calculation. So I kept putting it off, and I kept sort of being nudged about it, what's happening with that report? And I took some of my own advice, and I spoke to some people about it, and I actually said, what if I can't do this? What will happen? And the response was, well, we're not going to know that until you give it a go, and if you can't do it, then we'll come up with a plan, we'll figure something out, And actually just having that conversation made me think, okay, it's not the end of the world if it doesn't work. But had I not given myself that opportunity to have that conversation, I would have just carried on, avoiding doing it, and it would have become urgent. I did it, it worked, it was fine. But, sometimes you have to call yourself out on why you're putting something off and deal with the why rather than deal with the thing.
Yeah. And you also find with procrastination, when you're looking at it, you're putting something off potentially, is actually the thing that you were putting off, that you just did it. You just somehow just knew how to do it. It wasn't as difficult as you thought it was going to be.
We overthink. We overthink things. We're humans. That's what happens. We overthink stuff, and very often that procrastination, like I said, is quite psychology driven. There's some reason why we're doing something, and most of the time the thing itself probably won't take that long to do, but we've created some story in our mind about it, which is distracting and detracting from getting the actual thing done. And sometimes what I do in that situation is I will literally set myself an amount of time. But how long should it reasonably take to do that thing? It should take a half an hour, and I'll set a stopwatch and try and force myself to kind of focus on actually just doing it and trying to switch off from all the negative thinking that might happen.
I think that would freak me out a little bit. I'd just be constantly looking at it like you're in an exam or something, and that the time's ticking down.
Sometimes I like a bit of pressure. I work better to deadlines.
I do too, but that might be a bit far for me. Maybe not good for the stopwatch.
I don't always. Sometimes if I know that something literally won't take that long, but my own stories sort of stopping me from doing it, that's something that helps me. So I appreciate that really.
So in terms of the distraction element of things then, so stopwatch or no stopwatch, you've got to get something done. How do you deal with the email notifications that are coming in? Just say your WhatsApp's going on.
Switch it all off. The reality is that as humans, we are constantly surrounded by things that ping, ring and ding 24/7. And particularly with emails, if you have that little bit of an email popping up on your screen, you're going to be distracted, you're going to read it, and then you might go, oh, I've got to drop everything and deal with that. But the reality is, if something major was happening in one of your buildings or whatever it might be, someone will pick up the phone. And if you're distracted, then it means that you're going to deal with that thing, then you're going to go back to what you were doing and you're going to have to take about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes to get back into the headspace of that thing. It's not a great use of time. So switch off things that ping, ring and ding. And the other thing, potentially, and this is an interesting one, is body doubling. So where most of us are now working hybrid or fully remote, sometimes the presence of other people makes us a little bit more accountable. But you just don't have that in that remote context. And what a lot of people have started to do is to have a meeting with somebody where you're not talking to each other, but you're just there as a sort of a way of giving yourself a bit more accountability. Just the presence of somebody else in your workspace in some way helps you to focus. So that's a good one.
Does that work even if you take yourself off to a coffee shop or something like that to work, or is it
possibly? Yeah, it may not work for everybody, but I know that when I'm in my office, I'm focused in a very different way because I am surrounded by people. I'm not saying I don't focus well at home, but it feels different.
Yeah.
But sometimes that presence of another person or other people just, I don't know, it does something.
It's the energy in the room a little bit at the
Yeah,
time
maybe.
as well. So,
So that's quite a helpful technique for some people.
Okay, I like that. Sounds good.
Body doubling.
If only we could, right?
I know. Multiple versions.
Yes, that would be great. Which takes me on to multitasking, actually. Myth, nonsense, can it be done?
We can't literally,
Can it be done well?
we can't literally do lots of things all at the same time. And I don't think it's helpful to think about that because we're kind of putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to be able to multitask. I think it's far better to spend time doing one thing, finish that thing, move on to the next thing. So is it a myth? Well, physically you can't do, so yeah, no.
Rubbish. Nonsense.
Yeah. Helpful, I think.
Yeah, and then in terms of, you hear it a lot of the time, oh, I'm so busy, I'm just so busy. Everything is just happening all at once and I'm just so busy and blah, 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 blah. What's the difference between busy and productive?
So busy is having a lot of things to do. And let's be honest, we all have a lot of things to do.
We're all busy.
Yeah, we're all busy. Being productive is actually more about output, actually getting stuff done. But there's also a difference in mindset around busy and productive. So people who have that, oh, woe is I'm so busy, actually that's kind of just focusing on the volume of stuff. The productive mindset, on the other hand, is trying to achieve a quality piece of work and get it done and achieve more with that. So I think it's better to try and adopt a productive mindset of getting stuff done. And to be honest, I'm not the best finisher. So for me, that productive mindset is quite important. And that's where things like time blocking and setting bits of time can make you feel like you're achieving more. But busy is just, I've got a lot of things to do. Productive is, I need to achieve those things within a lot of time.
Yeah. So what is time blocking?
So time blocking is something I'm sort of newer to, and I started working with somebody who time blocks, and I looked at it and I thought, that's interesting. I don't think it will work for me, but I'll give it a go. It's basically, as its title suggests, blocking off bits of time in your calendar to get through all the different streams of your job. So if you think about whatever your job is, you've got different bits of your job, and let's say books manager as an example. They've got to respond to emails, they've got to do client reports, they've got to, authorise invoices, do budgets, all these different bits of their job. But are they just reacting to the person that's shouting the loudest, and when do all of those things get done? So if you actually block off an hour to do X, and then the next hour to do Y, and then the next hour to do ABC, and you're chipping away at things and you stick to that hour, you're more likely to get more things done because you're in that mindset of, I'm just responding to emails for an hour, I'm just dealing with budgets for 2 hours. So you're doing the same sort of activity within that time. And it means that you're more likely to get all the different bits of your job done effectively. But it's challenging in a reactive role because you're being distracted by things. You know, somebody will phone up and say, I've got a leak and you have to drop everything. And you know, so a lot of people, when I talk to property managers about time blocking, a lot of people love it. And some people have that kind of, you know, I'm constantly then going to have to be changing my diary around. But you're kind of doing that anyway, but just in your head.
Yeah.
So I think it is better. It focuses the mind. So for me, I was a bit sceptical about it. And I don't 100% block my time. I can't because I do need gaps to deal with reactive things. But I'd say I probably time block about 60 to 70% of my day now. And it has massively helped me to streamline how I work. So I'm a fan.
Okay. And I suppose in a way it's a little bit like a to-do list as well, because, you know, if you're blocking in a budget for something, that's part of your to-do list. So that's been time blocked into your diary. So it kind of helps the two things at once.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we talked about to-do lists, and I do love a to-do list, and I do write everything down. But the thing about to-do lists is that some of that stuff is just your day-to-day bits that, as you said, could be done with your time management blocks. And from a very practical perspective, what people do is they'll block that time in their, let's say, their Outlook calendar, and in the meeting they'll put the specific bits that they need to do, so that it's there, not on the to-do list. And your to-do list then just becomes the more sort of reactive things. But reactive things can still be time blocked. So I literally will have an hour, 2 hours, whatever, in my calendar to do my to-do list reactive things. Whereas bigger things that become projects are on like a separate list kind of thing. So it works for a lot of people. It's not everyone's cup of tea.
Okay. So is there then a link between time management, being productive, and people burning out? Is there a link there somewhere?
I think so. I think, you know, we talked about energy management at the beginning. I think if you're not looking after yourself in terms of how you're managing your time, and you're procrastinating a lot, you're spending more time than you should on things, that might mean that you're spending time working beyond your standard working hours. That's obviously going to result in burnout. So I do think there's a massive correlation between those things. And like I said, if people focus on the minutes and try and work more productively, and manage their time better and have enough downtime, it's going to be better. If you're constantly spending longer than you should on things, it's going to impact you somewhere. And, you know, a lot of people, and I've been in this situation myself, you know, I spent sort of, I don't know, over 10 years being a workaholic. At some point, you can't sustain working like that. You just can't. So it is about every day, how can I be more productive? How can I switch off and have the rest that I need? Because if I'm not resting my mind, then, you know, it's going to take me longer to do things. So and so that kind of goes around. So I think that managing our time effectively is not just nice to have. I think it's essential.
And then with people interrupting you, for example, you work in an office, you've got you're a leader in that office, you've got people asking you questions. How do you then, even if they're not disrupting you on purpose, but they still need something because they're managing their time, so they need answers to their questions. How do you then deal with interruptions that you're not expecting?
So that's been my life, you know, my entire career. So the first thing is a lot of managers get into that mindset of just answering questions that are asked to them, because partly that's our job. But actually, sometimes it's about pushing back to that person to say, what have you done to find an answer yourself? And the more that you do that, or they'll do that before coming to you. So it's very easy as a manager to say, oh, I'll just give you the answer, but you're not teaching that person how to get the answer themselves. There's also that thing managers do, which is, oh, I'll just do it myself, it'll be quicker. That's ultimately not great for your own time management. But dealing with interruptions is an interesting one, because back in the day, many years ago, when I managed a lot of different teams, sometimes I would literally have people queuing outside my office. It was like a doctor's surgery. It was ridiculous. Thankfully, it's not like that now. But I implemented a system where I had interruption time, and I literally set aside a couple of hours every morning between, let's say, 9 and 12. Those are the times you can interrupt me, you can come and ask me anything, and I kept my diary free for that purpose. But after that time, unless it's mega, mega urgent, it can wait until the next day. And so that provided me with the opportunity to support the people in the way that I needed to, but to also give me some time in the afternoon to do what I needed to do. So I think sometimes managers sort of just accept the way things are, rather than saying, right, how can I control this a little bit differently here and provide a bit of structure? And so I think that can be very helpful. And to be honest, when I implemented that, I didn't stick to it for very long, because I didn't always need to, because once I put that in place, people just naturally were a little bit more respectful of my time. And that's not a bad thing. But as a manager, you want to make sure that you are approachable and available, but that doesn't mean to say it has to be 24/7. And it's providing a structure to say, this is the time for you to come to me, and this is the time for me to work on what I need to work on.
So was there a delegation aspect to that as well? You know, you said about, oh, I'll just do it myself, it'll be quicker. So where does delegation come in terms of time management?
I think it's really important for managers to invest time in upskilling their people to be able to do what they need to do. And the best way to do that is, you know, if I have somebody who comes to me with an issue and I don't know the answer, and I'm a human, I know what I know and I don't know what I don't know. Perhaps earlier on in my career I would have said, oh, leave it with me, I'll sort it out, and then I'll have to figure it out because I don't want to look stupid. Now I'll say, I haven't got a Scooby, sit down, let's work it out together. But that process is helping that person to see my thought process so that they can follow that pattern. They're learning not just what the answer is, but how I'm getting the answer. Yeah. You know, if you are a manager that is hoarding work, you have to work out why that's happening, because there's always a reason. Is it that, you know, you don't trust your people? Maybe they haven't been trained enough. Maybe they're not skilled in that area and need more support. Maybe it's more about you and you look, oh, I've done all these things, and you know. So work hoarding for managers is not helpful for their own time management. But also, we want people to be superstars. You know, as a leader, I feel, you know, my job as a leader is to turn all these people into superstars and rock stars, and you know. So if I'm work hoarding, I'm not giving them the opportunity to shine. And I think that that's something that managers don't always think about as well. So there's also stuff in that delegation space, and I think a lot of people struggle with it because they think, you know, if I give somebody else something to do, then I'm micromanaging them or something. But that's part of the gig.
Yeah.
Is how you do it. But,
yeah, definitely. And doing it with kindness, compassion,
absolutely,
thinking about others.
Yeah, it's not about barking orders at somebody. It's, you know, that is part of the management gig.
Yeah. And is there a bit like if you got to the end of the week and you just kind of look back on your week and have any, do you set yourself any reflection time in your time blocking diary to look back and think, actually I could have done that a bit better? And that could be in any aspect, couldn't it? That might not necessarily be about time management, but that could be reflection time on your week in general.
I do that a lot. I'm a massive believer in reflection. I'm not a journaler. A lot of people like to journal. That's not my bag. But I think a lot, particularly if I'm driving. Obviously, I'm paying attention to the road. But you know, driving, that's my time to sort of think things through. And yeah, I'm always reflecting. And also, I seek feedback from the people around me regularly. You know, how have I done that? Could I have done that better? Because I want to do things well. Maybe it's that perfectionist in me kind of coming out. But yeah, so I do a lot of reflecting, but it's more thinking it through. And I mentioned, you and I spoken about it. I speak to a therapist every 2 weeks, so that is sort of forcing me to reflect on my time. So yeah, I think that's an important thing for everybody to do and build those self-awareness muscles.
And is there any advice that you would give someone who always says, not always says, but if they say, oh, I just don't have enough time, I just haven't had time to do this, I haven't had time to do that, I'm guilty of that myself. Any advice for me?
Well, like I said,
enough time.
I think, we're all a bit guilty of feeling like that, but it's actually working out the reality. And there are lots of things. So I said the minutes add up. Where are the minutes that are time wasting? And I sometimes get people to do a bit of a time and emotion study for themselves. Actually, how are you really spending your time? And not in a sort of a criticising way, but just in a factual, right, I spent 10 minutes, faffing about with blah, blah, blah. I spent 5 minutes having a natter to somebody. All right, we need to natter to people. I spent, I had a meeting for an hour and it overran by half an hour. How could we have done that meeting differently to stick to an hour? So I think it's about being quite brutal with yourself about how you are actually using every minute of that day and kind of calling yourself out on it a little bit in the time wasting bit, because 30 minutes of time wasting every day is over 3 weeks of work in a year. But I think people almost don't want to kind of shine a spotlight on their own sort of time management, because it can be quite revealing. And we know as humans that we are guilty of wasting a lot of time. I always think about the time before going on holiday. I think people are more productive in that week. Yeah. But why is that? Because you've got that productive mindset of, I have to get this done, as opposed to, yeah, it'd be nice to get this done. It's a very different mindset. You're much more focused because you have to be. And that's why things like the 4-day working week model is quite effective, because that model is about working the same hours, just 1 day less, but you're working in a more concentrated way in those 4 days. And there have been many, many studies done on the 4-day working week model, and it's, people are more productive in less time because of the shift in mindset. So yeah, call yourself out, do a little time emotion study, really understand how you are using time.
And how do you support your employees? So as an organisation, and not just obviously in your organisation, but recommendations for other organisations to better support across the team rather than just individuals.
So one of the things that we do is, and this doesn't work for all teams, but for certain teams, like this year I created an operations team for the first time, and we did a little exercise where we looked at everyone's strengths and weaknesses in the team. And one of my weaknesses, I mentioned, I'm not a great finisher. So when it comes to doing projects, I'm great with the ideas, I'm great with part of the execution, and then I lose the dopamine, the dopamine high, and I get bored and I move on to the next thing. So we structured some of the work around the team's strengths and weaknesses. So the people who are good finishers will come in and finish off bits, and I'll support the creative parts, or whatever that might be. Now that doesn't work with all teams, but sometimes it is about having those conversations. If you've got a common goal, then how is it best to collectively and collaboratively achieve that goal rather than everyone working for themselves? So it's about having those conversations, being open to those conversations, and to not, just because you're admitting your weaknesses doesn't make you a weak person. It means let's focus on the things that you're good at, be the superstar in that bit, and letting everyone's strengths play out. So.
I like that actually. I remember, my dad passed away nearly 20 years ago, but I always remember when I was going through my GCSEs, and he said to me, what do you enjoy? What do you want to do? Because I was really struggling with science. Science is not my bag. It doesn't interest me. The only thing I like about the scientific space, if you like, is space, randomly, and not much of it either. Just, well, that's cool. But it's just not my thing. And he's like, oh, are you going to be a scientist? No. what do you want to do? So I told him what I wanted to do. My 16-year-old self is probably very different to now, but what do you want to do? We'll focus on that then. And if you need help with that because you want to do it, then we'll. So I don't, as you say, your weaknesses aren't. It's not a bad thing.
No, you can't all be good at
everything. But I am not a scientist, nor do I want to be one.
Yeah.
So I focused on business and English, and all of the stuff that I either enjoyed or I wanted to do as a career. So I think he was clearly very wise.
Very wise.
Yes.
Ultimately, just bringing that back to energy. If we're doing work that we love and work that we're good at, we're going to need less energy. If we do something that we love but we're not that good at it, we're going to have to work harder. And if we're doing something, that we're good at but we just hate, again, we're going to have to sort of have more energy. So that plays out in the workplace, and I think a lot of workplaces focus too much on people's weaknesses and improving weaknesses. And yes, of course, there's an element of that in terms of what are the core skills of doing the job, and if you need to do X and you're not going to X, you're going to have to upskill.
Yeah.
But if doing X is not the be all and end all, why focus on it? Be a superstar for the things that you're great at, because that's a good thing, and then you'll use less energy and you'll be happier in your life.
Everyone should work for you,
Yeah. Just about that.
But what is one habit that you do personally that tends to make, I know you said about time blocking, but is there a small habit that makes a big difference to you?
Something that I've recently been thinking about is sort of time blocking in a slightly different way. So once a month I will block off half a day to just do admin, the bitty things that I don't get to do that build up. So I've blocked that in. But also thinking about how I structure my week. So I used to have a lot of meetings on a Monday, constant meetings and like catching up with people kind of meetings. And it occurred to me that my brain, which doesn't work as well as it used to, is better on a Monday because I've had the weekend to relax. So why aren't I using my time on a Monday to do more complex things? And actually, I can do those catch-up meetings on a Friday when my brain's a little bit fried, and it's not that I don't have to pay attention in those meetings, but they're different kinds of meetings where I'm not having to use my brain in the same way. So a bit like what we were talking about earlier in terms of energy management, it's also thinking about different patterns within the week where I work better at certain things than others and structuring my time around my brain, basically.
Okay. And if someone's listening and they want to improve one thing about their time management, say that everything is super chaotic, they just don't know where to start, they've got piles of paperwork everywhere, what would your first bit of advice be that you can finish off with?
Think of a time when you were super organised. What did that look like? What were you doing then that you're now perhaps not doing, or that you've let sort of slip by the wayside? And the other thing is allowing yourself time to take all the chaos that you've got and organise it. People used to laugh at me many years ago when we were more paper orientated, and I would have piles of paper. Sometimes, even in the most hectic periods of work, I had to just stop. I would get plastic folders and labels and label all the plastic folders with whatever, and I would just sort out the paperwork. And just the physical act of doing that made me feel a bit better. So in today's world, that might look like spending time organising your inbox, or clearing that out, or whatever that might look like. Allow yourself the time for organisation, because it is a time-consuming activity. And if you're feeling completely disorganised, you have to get to a point of feeling like you've sorted out the clutter. And the other thing is to think about your working environment. If you're working from home, if the space that you've got is really messy and cluttered, it's going to have an impact on your mind. So, and I'm quite a messy person, but sometimes when I'm having those moments, I could be in a very hectic space. I'm going to switch off everything, give myself an hour or two to just tidy and organise. And then I feel a bit better about kind of sitting back down and carrying on. But if everything feels chaotic, something has to break that cycle. but it's allowing yourself the time to do that.
Yeah, and having that feeling then once you've done all of that,
Yeah, it makes
and
it feel
that
good.
relief. Because I know if I'm surrounded by, I can't find anything, and when you need that thing, you need it urgently, and you can't find it. To have that relief of everything being organised, it's such a weight off your shoulders.
And the other thing is, if there's lots of chaos, then part of what you're thinking about is, what are all the things I'm not thinking about or I've forgotten about that are going to come and bite me on the, you know what. So just giving yourself that space to clear the decks, reset. Every day is an opportunity to reset, no matter what it is in your life. So that's a little Shelleyism.
I think that's a good place to end.
There you go.
Thank you very much for your time.